Hello everyone, welcome on back to the channel. Now that End of Dragons has been out for some time and we've gotten the experience of playing with the elite specializations, I thought it'd be pretty fun to do more of a retrospective review of how I have received these elite specializations. Some of my opinions might be shared amongst you, some of them may not, but now that we've had some time, let's dive into the heavy armor classes first and talk about their elite specs. First up, we have the Bladesworn. Now, the fantasy of the Bladesworn is an element of this elite spec that I hold in probably better regards than the others. From the betas, I was instantly hooked and understood that this spec had a pretty novel theme and goal in general, and making the decision to get rid of the warrior's weapon swap and giving it a completely new weapon was, dare I say, bold? Extremely bold? However, the gun saber really resonates with me and offers a cool playstyle that we don't see all too often in game. You take a moment of pause while in combat to charge up a mega chonky attack. Not only does it look cool, but it also feels cool. And getting those crits in the hundreds of thousands always feels satisfying, and especially so when you get them on something that isn't an ambient mosquito, so big wins. And the utility skills of armaments, but in all honesty, they kind of just feel more like gadgets. The utility skills, this is where I find the spec's weakness to linger a bit more, and it just is a little bit more of a weak point. Some of these skills are more situational and feel perfectly fine. Through balance updates, these skills have seen numerous improvements and quality of life updates and make them feel more worthwhile to take. And, I just gotta say that there is a certain element of visual spectacle that feels missing from these utility skills. It's also, the effectiveness of the utility skill, but also how it looks, and sometimes the appearance of it is just a little lackluster when you look at the rest of the spec. And then as for the traits of the Bladesworn, I gotta admit, I don't really find much fault with the trait selections. Sure, there might be some weakness with a couple of the traits, but all in all, I'm always pleased with the choices that I have available on the spec. They don't radically change the role of the Bladesworn, but rather pivot your gameplay in ways that make you feel more comfortable and flexible. I don't know if I'm at a weird middle ground where I was never really interested in Warrior, but now I really enjoy the Bladesworn, which leads me to being more content with everything about the spec. I never had my sights on Warrior, so it was a bit of a surprise and a fun experience to play a cool new elite spec. Now, that being said, I do have one suggestion for a trait, and this is probably the Grandmaster Immortal Dragon. There's an element of this which, it focuses a bit more on self-sustain, just like the idea of perhaps the protection not only applying to yourself, but allies around you, as it is only 1 second of protection, and it's based on the charges that you build up. So, an element of just a little extra group defense while you are channeling it, making it maybe a little bit more viable in certain group situations, especially in competitive modes. But I don't really have that many ideas around improvements or suggestions, but I felt like I had to give one, so that was it. Now let's talk about the Revenant elite specialization, the Vindicator. The Vindicator is another one of my personal favorites from the End of Dragons selection. While it started out a bit more rocky in the betas, the swift course correction of allowing St. Victor and Arkamoris to be camped in with more player control made this spec leagues better. I mean, worlds better. Also, the separation of the endurance gain from Alliance stance and giving it to its own ability, known as Energy Meld, gave the spec even more control with its moving parts. And the Energy Meld skill assisted another unique aspect of this elite spec, and this is, of course, the dodge. With the release of the Vindicator, it only had access to 1 dodge, and at the time of writing this, a patch is coming to give them 2 dodges. I love when the game plays around with this staple mechanic such as the dodge, and it gives it a new flavor. And these dodges are visually and mechanically pleasing. But before we head into how the dodges change via the traits, let's review the dual legends that is the Alliance stance. Arkamoris is your more DPS legend, and St. Victor is tailored to a healing playstyle. Having the access to essentially swap between 3 legends, which includes the other legend that you have slotted on your F1, allows the Vindicator to be a very versatile fighter. Archimedes' skills are all really powerful and perhaps a bit too strong in some situations, but what I find to be questionable is the lack of an upkeep skill on the Archimedes side. Part of me feels like the Spear of Archimedes elite skill should be a spirit that you summon that continues to fire out spears so long as you have that skill kept up, and the Spear of Archimedes acts as an upkeep skill. Because on the St. Victor side, the kit does have an upkeep skill on its elite, which provides constant healing around you. His overall kit for St. Victor is passable and feels nice, but only shines when there are lots of conditions being thrown around on your allies. And in PvE, enemies applying conditions is definitely getting better, but not quite at the rate I would personally find interesting and kind of prefer. So it's getting there, but perhaps not always the most valuable. And with the addition of ally targeting healing skills in End of Dragons, I was surprised that St. Victor didn't take advantage of these effects and that there are no ally target skills for the more supportive abilities. So I have a couple suggestions also on the utility skills. And I've already mentioned this, Spear of Archimedes. I would just like this to be more of an upkeep skill where the spirit will persist so long as you have this ability activated, but have a higher energy drain cost, as it could be a little powerful. And as for the St. Victor side, to just play around with ally targeting, its healing skill, Selfless Spirit. What if you heal your specific ally up front as well, and then pulse the healing around them, giving you some more agency and control? I think going in this direction, allowing players to have that flexibility is a pretty smart move. Now let's get into the traits. Through the Grandmaster traits, Vindicators are able to change the effect and sizing of their dodge, allowing them to grow in the role they're playing. Do you want a high damage dodge? Go with Forerunner of Death. Want a boon extension with a bit of damage, but more of a hybrid dodge? Go with Vassals of the Empire. Or are you looking for a more healing dodge? Go with Saint of Zuhelzer. So many options for so many playstyles, just gotta love it. However, I do find some potential growth with a few of the traits, even including the traits that aren't Grandmasters. So here are a few of my thoughts and suggestions. First up, we have a Adept trait, Redemptor's Sermon. This currently activates healing when you drop below a health threshold. What if this skill activated on your elite skill and had a 30-second cooldown? So using an elite skill heals allies in the area and cleanses their conditions. A little bit less of a heal and maybe just one condition removed in a larger radius. Scion's Trust. For some reason, I never find myself taking this. Aung Scion's Trust feels like it just doesn't have a place and it doesn't have a unique aspect to it. So I'd say fully redesign the course of this trait. I've come up with Aung Scion's Trust. Gain Aung Scion's Trust when using Energy Meld. Gain endurance every attack and apply vulnerability. Endurance gained does not scale with targets struck. So this would be a bit more of a stronger single target endurance generation, as most of the time these master tier traits tend to rely on you being in area of effect, group settings. And there isn't necessarily a trait that allows you to play by yourself as strongly and gain enough endurance generation out of that. So as we know in group content, people really look to be applying quickness or alacrity or stability/resistance. I think those are really the 3 major boons for 3 different playstyles. And in the case of Vindicator, they can't apply quickness, nor can they apply alacrity, and I don't believe they can really apply ample amounts of group stability. So there is potential within the Grandmaster tier to give the Vindicator access to these boons, as you would have to specialize into that boon in that playstyle. So first up, Forerunner of Death. What I would do is add quickness to this trait. When you gain the buff of Forerunner of Death, your outgoing strike damage is increased, and each time you attack, you will pulse quickness around you in intervals. And then next up, Saint of Zuhelzer. I would add alacrity to this. So if you were a healing Vindicator, what is missing and what prevents you from playing this in group content is that you don't have access to alacrity. Most healers have access to alacrity, so if you can't provide it, you're gonna get pushed out. You're gonna get edged out a bit by other classes and other professions and specializations. So what I would do is just add 6 seconds of alacrity when you dodge in that area. And overall, really enjoy Vindicator. Think it's a very solid spec. Have a lot of fun playing it. It looks so cool, but I do find a little bit more growth potential in the trait department. Other than that, let's move on to the final heavy armor elite spec for this expansion. We have the Willbender. Now I really enjoy the fast-paced nature. Very much novel to the Guardian class. Now the offhand sword is a visual delight when paired with the main hand, but it feels like it's fallen behind in the PvE meta. It's not as powerful as it could be. And the physical skills are really cool and bring more of a martial element to this soldier profession, while having an element of like magical hypermobility with shadow steps teleports. But they also feel like they've fallen a little behind and are just a bit weak. So in all, maybe just add a little bit more power to it, a bit more crit damage, crit chance, something along those lines. And I really appreciate some of the spins they add to these physical skills. But yeah, the power could be a little bit better. The trait choices are where the Willbender really starts to falter. Personally, was super interested to see them forcing a Guardian to specialize with their beta interpretation of the Willbender and pivot away from the condition damage playstyles the Guardian is famous for, specifically in the form of burning. Their changes from beta reverted this notion and even introduced further support for burning builds, where there was originally never a condition trait. I, for one, was really excited to see Willbender fill a newer niche of Guardian as the fast-striking, strike damage assassin, but it seems it's gone down the path of Condi Firebrand 2.0 with a lot of mobility, maybe, perhaps. And the associated boon with the Willbender is one that doesn't really make sense to me, as with it being a more aggressive spec, I would have expected them to have access to quickness rather than alacrity. The Grandmaster Phoenix Protocol allows the Willbender to share alacrity when paired with another trait, but it feels disconnected from the striking fast fantasy, and it's also a bit clunky in execution, as you have to take the other trait. As for the other two Grandmasters, they feel fine, but come with unnecessary drawbacks. The Deathless Courage trait sounds OP in writing, but I've yet to actually select this trait, as its use is very niche and difficult to gain benefit out of it. So, with all of this being said, I want to focus more so on my review of the traits and perhaps talk about some suggestions. Now, first and foremost, perhaps controversial if you really love the burning builds on Guardian. However, it's not as exciting or new or novel. I would love to see them go back, instead of Searing Pact, to put in Boon Pact. And this would just read as gain concentration. And its unique element would be that Willbender flames are wider. Willbender flames are already very skinny, very tiny, and sometimes hard to hit. It'd allow you to strike enemies a bit more reliably and gaining those benefits out of it. As for power, in the sentiment of increasing their power potential, I would up the actual power gained, and I would up the amount of damage increase that Willbender Flames get. And as for Conceited Curate, this trait had potential. Now it just feels rather weak, and I don't know if the healing power is really necessary. What I would do is, instead of healing power, transfer this to Vitality, and then buff the amount of healing that the Willbender Flames do baseline. As for Restorative Virtues, I need to just change this a little bit for a suggestion I have for Grandmaster. Just buffed the amount of alacrity you get with this trait up from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. So I'm Holy Reckoning. I like this a lot, but what if it also shared out might, perhaps at a lesser duration? Just giving some more group access, group might generation. I don't know, could be pretty nice, pretty tasty. And as for Vanguard tactics, I also want to bring in an element of group utility. Courage grants resistance in the targeted area as well. Now for the Grandmasters, Phoenix Protocol. As I mentioned, the alacrity really doesn't make sense for this particular playstyle of a Guardian. I think the alacrity is maybe more fitting of Firebrand, honestly. What I've done is I've just kind of reconfigured this. Resolve no longer heals, but grants you regen. Triggering Flowing Resolve's passive pulses quickness around you. I've also made it to where you don't have to take your Virtues trait, where you can share your F2, and instead just bake it more so into the trait itself. I have updated the Tyrant's Momentum. I also think that lethal tempo, the trait itself, doesn't need to increase your condition damage. For the Willbender, instead of giving you extra condition damage, what if it gave you extra ferocity? So, Tyrant's Momentum, damage increase, lethal tempo now does 3% power and 3% ferocity, and the justice duration has been increased by 2 seconds. A little bit more simple of a trait, but still extremely effective in that strike damage category. And the next, Deathless Courage. I really wanted to prune and refine this trait because there's so many elements. While the courage buff is on you, you cannot be downed. Point blank, period. Courage's passive effect grants stability to allies on a modified duration and interval. Courage no longer grants Aegis, which is perfectly fine in my opinion. This would just be when you use your F3 for 6 seconds, you cannot be downed. You might have to increase the cooldown of the F3, considering this trait, or give the Deathless Courage effect its own internal cooldown if you'd want to, and to gain a little bit more use out of it and to maybe make it more enticing, even if you don't get any use out of the invulnerability effect. When you use and trigger your passive effect, it would also pulse 1 second of group stability every 2 seconds. And that is my review of the 3 heavy armor professions. In all, really enjoy the heavy armor professions of Willbender, Bladesworn, and Vindicator. I think these 3 are very, very strong and have had a pretty good place in the game. Thank you all so very much for coming on by. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below your thoughts about these elite specializations. Like, share, and subscribe for more GW2 content. And if you want to support the channel, head on over to Patreon to get early access to all of these videos. I also stream over on Twitch every day of the week. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate you. And come back around when I talk about the medium armor and the light armor professions. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye everyone! Mwah!